He thought no one would ever find out. But the truth has a way of clawing its way to the surface, no matter how deep it is buried. It was a night that felt wrong from the start. November 23rd, the city soaked in relentless rain, streets gleaming like liquid mirrors under the pale, flickering streetlights. Every sound was amplified. The distant hum of a passing car, the soft drip of water from a broken gutter, the whisper of wind slipping through the cracks in the old apartment building. In apartment 47B, something had shifted, though no one could see it yet. Something terrible had already begun. Elena had vanished. Her room, once a haven of warm sunlight and laughter, now felt empty, hollow. Her favorite book lay open on the bed, a single page fluttering in the breeze from the cracked window. Her small bracelet, copper and worn from years of careless affection, glittered faintly on the windowsill. She was gone. And in that absence, the apartment seemed alive with secrets, the walls whispering things no one wanted to hear. Her parents were frantic, tearing through the rooms, their voices sharp, desperate, calling her name again and again. Each unanswered cry pressed heavier on their hearts, turning fear into something physical, something that made their chests tighten and their hands shake. Neighbors were questioned, streets combed, phone calls made, yet no one had seen her leave. No footprints led away. It was as if she had evaporated into the night. Except for one person. Her older brother, Igor, sat on the couch, hands folded in his lap, eyes fixed on a single point on the carpet, unmoving. Calm. Too calm. His parents glanced at him, hope flickering briefly that he might have some clue, some small detail that could explain the impossible. But his expression did not waver. There was no panic, no confusion, only the faintest trace of something else. Something hidden behind the steady gaze. Something dangerous. In the days leading up to Elena's disappearance, nothing had seemed unusual. Igor had been quiet, brooding perhaps, but so had most teenagers. Elena had been bright, careless with her laughter, trusting, always thinking the world was filled with good people. They had argued occasionally, siblings always do, but nothing that suggested what was about to happen. The city had been raining that night, blurring the lines between shadow and reality, hiding things that should have been seen, making it easy for secrets to move unseen. The first clue came the next morning. A small, almost invisible bank transfer had been made 24 hours before her disappearance. A large sum, far beyond anything Igor should have access to. It had come from an unknown account and left the family's financial statements untouched until an eagle-eyed accountant noticed the discrepancy. At first, it seemed irrelevant, a mundane transaction lost in the digital noise of the world. But then the timing could not be ignored. The transfer happened the night before Elena disappeared. Detectives were called. They arrived in the soft drizzle of early morning, umbrellas folding with mechanical precision as they stepped onto the wet pavement. Every detail was scrutinized: the apartment, the surroundings, the last known movements of the girl. And slowly, the evidence began to point in one direction, a direction no one wanted to see. Igor's alibi was too clean, too rehearsed. Small inconsistencies appeared in his story, slight hesitations, glances to the side, a cough that did not match the question. And when asked directly about the money, he smiled faintly, the kind of smile that made even experienced investigators uneasy. Elena's phone revealed more fragments. Deleted messages, now recovered, hinted at arrangements made, people involved in ways that were chilling and precise. Names and numbers that should have meant nothing were suddenly terrifying. It became clear that she had been targeted, carefully, methodically. The network behind her disappearance was hidden behind layers of anonymity, But the most disturbing revelation was the one that hit closest to home. Someone in her own house had orchestrated it. The detectives started piecing together the timeline. The night of the disappearance. Igor had gone out briefly, supposedly to the corner store, but surveillance footage showed him lingering near the elevator, waiting, watching. The time between his return and Elena's disappearance was short, too short to be coincidental. Every step, every gesture, every quiet moment in that apartment that night took on a new meaning. And in the quiet, Igor's calm remained unbroken, as if he knew he had already won, as if he had already hidden himself behind a mask so convincing no one could see the truth. Meanwhile, Elena's friends began coming forward. They described her as cheerful, unaware of danger, trusting even when there were reasons not to be. She had confided in them, laughed with them, never imagining that the person she called brother would become her most dangerous enemy. The contradiction between the Elena they knew and the one being held in secret was jarring. And as detectives dug deeper, the scale of betrayal became more horrifying. This was not a crime of passion, not a theft, not a robbery. It was a deliberate, cold-blooded plan, executed by someone who should have protected her, someone who should have loved her unconditionally. The network behind Elena's disappearance was calculated, professional, yet crude in ways that suggested urgency and desperation. Messages on her phone revealed whispered arrangements, payments promised and made, a timeline that had been followed almost like a script. Every connection led back to a single thread: Igor. He had moved through the family's life like a shadow, unnoticed, underestimated, all the while setting the pieces into place. The night stretched on in the apartment, empty and heavy. Her parents could not sleep. The walls seemed to close in, carrying whispers of things they could not comprehend. Every sound became a question, every shadow a suspicion. And all the while, Igor remained unnervingly composed, as if daring anyone to question him, as if the knowledge of his own guilt gave him some strange power over the rest of the world. The detectives, now certain of his involvement, knew that confronting him directly would require precision. Igor was clever, manipulative, and above all, patient. Any wrong word, any misstep could drive him deeper into concealment, erase the trail forever. They began documenting, mapping, observing, watching for the tiniest telltale signs that would reveal the full story behind the disappearance of a young woman who trusted too easily, and a brother who betrayed that trust in the most unimaginable way. In the quiet of that apartment, the first seeds of revelation were planted. The calm, composed figure of Igor on the couch would soon face questions that would unravel more than just a crime. They would expose a family torn apart, a betrayal that cut deeper than any physical wound, and a darkness that no one had anticipated. Elena's disappearance was just the beginning, the spark that would ignite a chain of events so shocking that the world outside could barely imagine. Detectives had begun mapping Igor's every movement, every interaction, every tiny anomaly that could point toward the truth. They reviewed hours of security footage, piecing together what seemed impossible at first, a pattern of behavior that suggested premeditation. Igor was always there, but never quite in view, like a shadow skimming the edges of perception. He moved through the apartment building, the nearby streets, even the local shops with an uncanny calm, a serenity that contrasted sharply with the panic that had overtaken the rest of the family. It was the small things that gave him away. A cigarette butt dropped in the stairwell, despite him being supposedly indoors. A receipt for a late-night convenience store purchase, despite him claiming to have never left the building. A witness who remembered seeing a figure that matched him loitering near the corner, lingering a moment too long, as if waiting for a signal. Each tiny detail was insignificant on its own, but together they formed a lattice of undeniable evidence. Meanwhile, Elena's phone became a treasure trove of information. Deleted texts, now painstakingly recovered, painted a picture of manipulation and control. Igor had accessed her social accounts, monitoring her conversations, removing messages that might have hinted at her suspicions. He had created confusion in her life, little by little, isolating her without anyone noticing. Friends recalled how she had seemed anxious in the days leading up to her disappearance, a subtle unease she never voiced aloud. The detectives discovered a series of coded messages sent from an untraceable number. At first, they seemed random, cryptic fragments of sentences. But when pieced together with timestamps and bank records, a chilling narrative emerged. Someone had been negotiating, arranging, and planning. The sum transferred to an unknown account was only a part of the payment. There were multiple transfers, each smaller than the last, spread over weeks. Someone had meticulously ensured that the trail would be difficult to follow. Elena's room, once bright and comforting, now held a sinister aura. Investigators noted small, almost imperceptible clues. A drawer slightly ajar, fingerprints smeared on the windowsill, the faint scent of something chemical lingering in the air. Every detail suggested that someone had been in her space, someone careful, but not perfect. And the truth became increasingly horrifying. Igor had been there, manipulating, controlling, preparing. The family's home, their sanctuary, had been infiltrated by a presence so intimate and invasive that it broke the very definition of trust. The first direct confrontation came unexpectedly. The lead detective, a woman with 25 years of experience, sat across from Igor in a small, sterile interrogation room. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Cameras recorded every expression, every micro-movement. The detective leaned forward, hands clasped, voice calm but firm. "We know about the transfers," she said. "We know about the messages. We know you were there. It's only a matter of time before everything comes out. Tell us what happened, Igor." He looked at her with a faint, almost imperceptible smirk. His hands rested on the table, folded neatly. "I do not know what you're talking about," he said, voice even, unshaken. "Elena is missing. I'm worried, like everyone else." But the detectives saw the small twitch in his eye, the subtle flex of his fingers, the hesitation before his words. It was not the reaction of someone innocent. It was the calculation of someone weighing consequences, anticipating reactions, controlling the flow of information. Igor had always been intelligent, perceptive, manipulative, but the detectives now understood that he was also dangerous. He could maintain a facade of normalcy even in the face of mounting evidence. As the investigation deepened, they began uncovering the network Igor had tapped into. It was not a vast criminal organization, not yet, but it was methodical, organized, and terrifying in its simplicity. People willing to exploit, to conceal, to profit. Each contact revealed another layer of complicity, another small thread connecting Igor to actions that no one could have anticipated. Every layer peeled back revealed something more personal, more intimate, more shocking. Igor had not merely orchestrated a disappearance. He had weaponized trust, manipulated emotion, and turned his own sister's life into a commodity. The family was slowly coming apart under the weight of these revelations. Elena's mother spent nights sleepless, pacing the apartment, whispering her daughter's name, her hands trembling, her mind racing through every interaction, every misstep, every missed warning. Her father moved like a ghost through the rooms, staring at empty chairs, haunted by the thought that the son he had raised with love and care could commit such a crime. And Igor remained composed, calculating, a chilling calm in the eye of the storm, fully aware of the devastation surrounding him, yet untouched by it. It was during this time that Elena herself began to communicate. A brief, cryptic message arrived, not through a phone or digital means, but through a friend she had managed to reach. "I'm alive, but he is not who he seems. Trust no one." The message was brief, almost a whisper of a warning, but it sent shockwaves through the investigation. The detectives now had confirmation that she was alive, that the network had not entirely silenced her, and that Igor's role was far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. Every step forward in the investigation revealed more of Igor's mind. The detectives began to study his psychology, trying to understand how someone could betray their own family so completely. Interviews with former teachers, friends, and neighbors painted a consistent picture. Charming, intelligent, calculating. A boy who had always been obsessed with control, with perception, with dominance. But until now, no one could have imagined that this obsession would manifest in the betrayal of the closest bond imaginable: brother and sister. Elena's survival became both a beacon of hope and a source of tension. Each clue she provided, each fragment of information, allowed investigators to map the network, to understand the transactions, the movements, the hidden safe houses. And yet, every revelation also increased the sense of danger. Igor had planned for contingencies. He had anticipated questions, potential interference, even the possibility that Elena might try to escape. Every move the detectives made felt like a chess game against a player who seemed always 2 steps ahead, yet was now beginning to make mistakes. By the end of this phase of the investigation, it was clear that the situation was no longer just a missing person case. It was a psychological labyrinth, a study in manipulation, control, and betrayal. Igor had weaponized trust itself, and the consequences were devastating. The detectives, exhausted, aware of the stakes, prepared for the confrontation that could finally reveal the full truth. But even as they prepared, one fact became impossible to ignore. In this game, Igor had the most intimate knowledge of every player, and he was not about to surrender easily. The morning light crept through the half-closed blinds, slicing the apartment into stripes of gold and shadow. Igor had spent the night in silence, his expression unreadable, as if the chaos around him were nothing more than background noise. The detectives had prepared meticulously, reviewing every detail of the evidence, rehearsing every question, every angle, every subtle way to force the cracks in his armor. They knew that confronting Igor directly was dangerous, that one misstep could push him to act unpredictably. But time was running out. Elena's messages had grown more fragmented, more desperate, a subtle warning that the network was aware of the investigation and ready to react. They decided to begin with the financial trail. The transfers, the coded communications, the untraceable accounts, all pointed to a series of hidden locations across the city: small apartments, abandoned warehouses, and temporary safe houses. Each lead was painstakingly verified, every minor inconsistency noted, and each step brought them closer to the terrifying realization: Igor had not acted alone, but his fingerprints were on every decision, every movement, every manipulation. His intelligence had been used to orchestrate a plan that combined deceit, fear, and cold calculation. Meanwhile, Elena herself had begun to leave traces, subtle hints that only a careful observer could notice. A pattern in discarded receipts, the arrangement of items left behind, a faint mark on a wall, clues that led detectives from one location to another, following her silent trail. They discovered that she had been moved multiple times, each time carefully monitored, each time isolated from the outside world. And yet, she had managed, through small acts of ingenuity and courage, to leave signs that she was still alive, still resisting, still fighting. The confrontation with Igor was inevitable. The detectives gathered in the sterile interrogation room once more, cameras rolling, notes in hand, every movement calculated. Igor entered calmly, the same composed expression he had worn since the beginning.
He sat down, hands folded, eyes flicking briefly to each detective before returning to a fixed point on the table. "I assume you've found something," he said, voice deceptively casual. "Something you think matters?" The lead detective leaned forward, her fingers drumming on the table. "We know about the transfers. We know about the messages. We know you orchestrated the network. Tell us where she is. Tell us what you've done." For a long moment, Igor said nothing, and the silence was heavy, almost tangible, pressing down on everyone in the room. Then he smiled faintly, the kind of smile that made even seasoned detectives uneasy. "You misunderstand," he said softly. "I did not harm her. I only facilitated opportunities. She was always safe. But some things," he paused, letting the words hang, "are beyond your understanding." The detectives exchanged glances, frustration simmering under the surface. Every word, every gesture, every calculated pause was designed to provoke, to manipulate, to draw them into his game. Igor had studied human behavior, learned the weaknesses of those around him, and now he was playing them like pieces on a chessboard. Meanwhile, Elena's final act of defiance began to unfold. Through a carefully timed sequence of signals and messages, she led the detectives to the last safe house. The apartment was small, sparse, but evidence of her presence was everywhere. A book left open, a faintly drawn map on a scrap of paper, messages encoded in ordinary objects. She had survived, had remained hidden, and yet had left the trail that would lead directly to Igor. The moment of revelation came in stages. Financial records, digital footprints, surveillance footage, all compiled into a damning web that pointed to Igor with absolute clarity. Every alibi, every explanation he had offered, unraveled under scrutiny. The network, once hidden, was exposed. The individuals involved, their roles, the way Igor had manipulated each one to maintain control and conceal the truth. It was a portrait of meticulous planning, of intelligence weaponized against the people closest to him. The detectives prepared for the final confrontation. Igor was called back, unaware that the net had closed completely. Cameras recorded, microphones captured every whisper, and the room seemed charged with a tension that was almost physical. When presented with the totality of the evidence, Igor's composure faltered for the first time. Not fear, exactly, but something else. Anger, frustration, perhaps a fleeting realization that the game he had controlled so carefully was over. Elena was brought into the room shortly thereafter. Her appearance was startling. Pale, worn from weeks of stress and fear, but resolute, her eyes sharp and unyielding. She faced Igor, the person she had once trusted implicitly, and the weight of betrayal hung in the air like a storm cloud. "I trusted you," she said, a voice steady despite the tremor of suppressed emotion. "I loved you as my brother, and you sold me." Igor's eyes flickered, a mix of disbelief and something darker. "Sold?
No, I only arranged for opportunities. You survived. You're here. Is not that enough? It is never enough, Elena said, her words slicing through the room like a blade. You betrayed everything. You destroyed our family. You used me as a pawn. And now, everything you built, every lie you told, has been exposed. The detectives watched, recording every moment, every word, knowing that this confrontation was the culmination of weeks of meticulous work. But the final twist came unexpectedly. Igor, for all his intelligence, had underestimated the human element, Elena herself. She had anticipated his moves, anticipated the network, and had manipulated the detectives as much as he had manipulated her. In a final act of defiance, she revealed the last hidden trail, a digital breadcrumb that connected Igor to an even larger scheme, one that could have extended far beyond the city, involving others who would soon face justice. The room fell silent. Igor, once untouchable, was cornered.
His facade of control shattered, leaving only a man exposed, vulnerable, and faced with the full weight of his actions. And as Elena was escorted safely out, the detectives realized that the story was far more complex than anyone had imagined. It was not merely a tale of betrayal. It was a portrait of human darkness, manipulation, and courage. And in the quiet aftermath, one truth became undeniable. Trust, once broken, leaves scars that no reconciliation can erase. The city was quiet as Elena stepped out of the safe house, her feet crunching against the frost-hardened ground. The early morning light painted the streets in soft shades of gray and gold, but it did little to soften the harsh reality she had endured. She was alive, but changed, her laughter muted, her innocence fractured. Every step she took was heavy with the memory of betrayal, a constant reminder that the person she had trusted most had been the architect of her suffering. Her parents were waiting at a safe location, faces etched with relief and exhaustion. Tears streamed freely down her mother's cheeks, while her father's hands shook as he reached for her, holding her close, as if trying to shield her from the weight of the world. Words failed them, leaving only the sound of sobs, whispers, and the faint hum of the city around them. They had survived the nightmare, but the nightmare had left its scars deep in every corner of their hearts. Meanwhile, Igor sat in a stark interrogation room, the culmination of his carefully plotted scheme laid bare before him. The detectives presented every piece of evidence, each fact designed to strip away the last remnants of his control. The network he had manipulated, the accounts he had accessed, the coded messages he had sent, all of it was now visible, undeniable, irreversible. His calm, the weapon he had wielded so effectively, faltered. For the first time, the quiet confidence he had relied on crumbled beneath the weight of exposure. "Do you understand what you've done?" the lead detective asked, her voice steady yet imbued with a restrained fury. Igor's eyes flickered, a momentary flash of fear, but also anger, almost defiance. "I did not hurt her," he said, voice low, almost pleading. "She's alive. Is not that enough?" Elena stepped forward, her gaze sharp, unwavering. "You destroyed our family," she said, voice trembling yet powerful. "You turned me into a commodity, and for what? Your obsession with control? Your envy? Your greed?" Each word struck like a hammer, reverberating in the cold room. Igor's shoulders slumped slightly, not in surrender, but in the faint acknowledgement of a truth he could no longer deny. The detectives explained the legal consequences, the charges, the long road to justice.
But even as the law would act, it could not undo the betrayal, the manipulation, or the psychological wounds that would linger for years. Elena's parents, though grateful for her survival, realized that their trust in their eldest son was irrevocably broken. The house that had once been filled with warmth now felt tainted, haunted by the memory of what had occurred behind its walls. And yet, amid the chaos and heartbreak, there was a strange sense of resolution. Elena's courage, her resourcefulness, and her subtle defiance had turned the tide. The network that sought to control her had been dismantled. Igor, once the master of manipulation, was now a prisoner of his own actions. The scale of his betrayal could not be undone, but the exposure of the truth prevented further harm. In a final, unanticipated twist, Elena revealed one last detail: a hidden cache of messages, recordings, and evidence of other individuals who had been complicit in the network. The revelation widened the investigation, promising further justice and confirming that Igor had been only one piece of a larger, darker puzzle. The detectives realized that the story they thought was over had another layer, an unsettling reminder of how far-reaching manipulation and betrayal could extend. As Elena walked away from the apartment building for the last time, she looked back briefly, eyes hardened, yet resolute. She had survived and exposed the truth and reclaimed a measure of control over her own life. But the shadow of betrayal would never fully leave her. And somewhere, in the depths of the city, Igor sat alone, facing not only the law, but the unbearable weight of what he had done, the knowledge that his actions had destroyed the most intimate bond, and that nothing could ever restore it. The story ended not with a sense of closure, but with a lingering, haunting question. How well can we ever truly know the people closest to us, and what darkness might be hidden behind the mask of familiarity? Elena had learned the answer in the harshest way possible, and the world around her had been forever altered by the revelation of a brother's betrayal. The silence that followed was profound and filled with relief, grief, and the chilling awareness that some secrets, once revealed, change everything.